back with our great team, Bram Lagrou, okay, as well as Arthur Kallos. So great to have us back.
Thank you, Kylie. Good to be back. Happy New Year, 2026.
Yeah, and happy Australia Day for yesterday. So great to see you all. But I am super excited actually for our special guest today, David McDermott. He's a founder and CEO of Evolve Strategy. And I thought, what a perfect time to actually have Dave on when we're at the beginning of the year, and all businesses or all leaders that are leading a team or leading a division or leading an organisation is having Dave on to talk about, how do we turn big ideas into strategies that actually work? Because I think what happens as businesses is we have these goals in our head, we have these ideas in our head, but unless we actually put it down on paper, unless we actually are able to execute it, they just become just a big idea. So Dave works with organisations, helping them to turn big ideas into strategies that actually work. But one of the other things I love about Dave is that you are really committed to also giving back. You support a lot of not-for-profits. You sit on a number of boards where you also advise them, and you also work with established corporations and mission-driven startups, around helping them to make a really big difference. So that's why I've asked Dave to come on board today. So welcome, Dave.
Thanks very much, Kylie. Thanks, Bram. Thanks, Arthur. Look forward to it.
Likewise.
So my first question, is I think what I'd like to start with, especially for our audience, because our audience is all small business owners, entrepreneurs, leaders that are looking to make a bigger impact in this world. Okay? And I'd love it if you could just simply explain what strategy really means to a small business in 1 minute, right?
Okay.
What would you say it is, and where would you say businesses go wrong with it?
Yeah. So let's see, one minute, and for small business, where you probably don't have a C-suite in place as opposed to a medium to larger business, which is more the area I do work in, is with leadership teams, medium to larger enterprises. But strategy, the 1 minute tip, I guess, for small business, still my view is essential for a small business to be clear about their strategy and to document it. It's more likely the husband and wife team, or if it's a small group of shareholders or a single owner, crafting the strategy, possibly pulling a manager in, if they have a small leadership team. Whatever the leadership team, I'm always very much encouraging the owner or the CEO to engage and include the leadership team very, very comprehensively in the development of the strategy for the next 12 months ahead and beyond. So I would say that's the case for small business, medium and large, the same. But for small businesses, you're not necessarily going to need or want a 100-page strategic plan, but the absolute bare minimum to me is clarity on where are you now. So the 4 pillars, where are you now in terms of your current challenges and opportunities? Where do you want to be, which includes your vision and mission, as well as practically what are your next 12-month strategic objectives, the things that you can be held accountable to and hold yourself accountable and say, I either did achieve it or I didn't, or we partially achieved it at the end of each calendar or financial year. What are your strategic priorities? So what's the business model, but also what are the projects that you're going to devote resources to that make sense to achieve your strategic objectives? And then what's the action plan? Like, what's the day-to-day, the month-by-month, the quarter-by-quarter roadmap that, I always suggest a kind of live updatable tracking tool that you can use with the owners or leadership team, that you can hold yourself accountable to and be held accountable to. So it's have the now, future options, action clear and documented, whether you're small, medium or a large business.
Yeah,
that was probably slightly more than a minute, but
you did well. I think that's where some businesses can go wrong, can't they? They think it has to be this long business plan that's like 60 pages. It has to be complex. I'm always saying, like, if you have a clear strategy, you know where you play and where you don't play, right? Because if you have, if we don't know that, then all we're doing is working on a to-do list. And that to-do list becomes so complex. I remember working with a university, and they were working on 110 initiatives, right? It was a large team, but it was 110 initiatives. I know you're shaking your head, Bram, way too many, right? And I ended up getting the organisation to map those initiatives back to our 5 goals that we wanted to achieve as an organisation, and only 30 of them did it, okay? So we had 80 things that people were working on that were not even mapped to that strategy. So if we don't have a clear where do we play and where don't we play, we just have this long to-do list, and everyone's like, I want to do that. I like doing that. And then all of a sudden we're working on 80 things that we shouldn't work on.
And that you're talking there, Kylie, about the area of how you structure your projects and whether you call them strategic priorities or the projects. I completely agree. And there's nothing wrong with having 110 things that you're doing, but you need to prioritize and categorize them so that at the very top, there are like usually minimum 5, but maximum 10 big chunky projects, and they all have or some of them, but the bigger ones usually have sub projects. So the other, 100 can fit into those top 5 or 10, and they're usually really, components of the really big chunky projects. But if you really truly have 110 big projects, that's ridiculous. Like not even a mega publicly listed entity can usually handle that many with, tens of thousands of employees. So yeah, I mean, there's a prioritization is the third strategic pillar in the what are our choices? So now, future options, what are our choices? And that includes what do we say no to in the year ahead? And if you've got too many projects on, then it absolutely, you've got to cut back. I mean, Steve Jobs is the story I always tell on this one, where the Apple board sacked Steve Jobs, and when Apple started declining later, they, in desperation, brought him back, and they'd scattered themselves too widely. They had many projects going at once. He instantly cut everything except for 3 of the 3 core most successful products, and I forget which ones they were, but there was a desktop Mac, I think there was the iPod, and maybe one other, and that was the beginning of the company starting to pick back up, and eventually becoming, for a while, the biggest company in the world by valuation.
Yeah.
Why interesting scenario that you played out there, and obviously with these large organisations and the PMO pretty much running the projects as such, and their teams supporting the directors of, or heads of, or general managers of. Different setting with the smaller family business.
Yes.
But I dare say that the latter be probably more reactionary, and not even proactive, time, resource. But reactionary, I find, is an interesting scenario where we react to things that we see, and we react to things that we hear, and it triggers some kind of emotion and or urgency, thought and urgency. And that's how it gets on the list. And so when you're a small business owner, you don't really have potentially someone there to tell you otherwise. So parking that for a moment, have you seen how reactions have influenced biases in the larger organisations you described to create a flow of work that may be biased and or in self-interest?
Yeah, in terms of when pressure or whatever it is creates a reactionary versus response.
Sure.
Like more an impulsive behaviour versus a more considered, thoughtful behaviour. Yeah, 100%.
Yeah.
And, Kylie will well know as a fellow executive coach, under stress, we all regress to a childlike can all regress to childlike behaviours, and all of us, we all have our dark side and our bright side, and running a business and all medium, small, large, they all have their own stresses. But a small business, you have to do everything, and you have to be across everything. And it generally is very stressful, and people go through a lot of challenge that employees generally don't. It's just a fact. And that stress will push the areas of our dark side out, that we either deal with them or they go unaddressed. So, yeah, I see stress as the number one cause of that sort of reactionary behaviour, and organisations, some are to greater or lesser degrees, but all have elements of stress. I've found in the last few years, I've mostly worked with organisations that are, you probably call them medium size, that actually their problem they're facing is they're growing so quickly, and the demand from their market is overwhelming their systems, and they're struggling to scale their systems to meet the demand, which, yes, it's a great problem to have economically and for the business, but it is a real problem. And the challenging behaviours, the drop in morale that you get, it's still the same as for other causes of stress. And it needs proactive thought, it needs strategy. Like a client in the last 12 months, for the first time ever, and they're a $500 million business, only recently, for the first time, they actually booked 2 days, took their leadership team off-site for that important annual, where are you now, where do you want to be, how will you get there, what will you actually do, the four strategic pillars, strategic conversation with the leadership team. And that was a first for them, and they knew they'd been delaying it for a very long time, and they really should have been implementing that sort of structure much earlier in their development. Sure. But better late than never. Yeah. And they're an example of a business that has that real problem, and they're still facing it. They're still working through it. Of a lot of reactive behaviour due to intensive, overwhelming customer demand that they're really, trying to get their systems up to speed to handle. Yeah. And yes, it is, I guess, being more short with people, saying things that you don't necessarily mean in the heat of the moment, and ideally having to apologise after. Yeah, of course, you get all those sorts of behaviours under periods of intense stress, and that comes down to how do people, I guess, manage their own behaviour in the workplace, whether it's leadership, management, or frontline. But is that what you were really probing into in terms of the reactive side?
Yeah, the reactive response to whatever might be happening globally, might be happening politically.
Okay. More business
sentiments, and how that drags us potentially away from those core principles. Because to your point, maybe it's something in the leadership that might be part of the dark side, as you framed it.
Yeah. I think I see what you're talking about, the business reaction.
What's that?
Yeah. And very briefly, I think it depends on the particular leader's capability, and some leaders are really good, even under intense stress and pressure, at looking forward into the future and just seeing things that they know their industry is trending towards, or a change that's coming, and putting in place some safeguards as well as innovations that are groundbreaking in their particular industry. And other leaders are not, and they're more, they plod along. They still do well, but don't have that sort of X factor that some others just natively do. And they're more the ones that, I guess, when you wake up in the and you read in the paper so and so has happened, that's when they change their systems to meet a need, as opposed to more sensing something coming in the future. And honestly, I've just seen that comes down to personality. You either got it or you don't.
It's amazing that your client got to the $500 million revenue without strategic planning in place.
With no junkets.
It was always just in the heads of the three directors, and look, they were honest about it. But that they're in the financial space. Westpac called them a big business pretending to be a small business.
Interesting.
Yeah, look, but it's surprisingly not uncommon that these businesses that have grown rather big are still, have the potential to implement proper strategic planning and haven't yet, or are not aware of the need for it. It's more common than you would think.
Do you know, it reminds me of something that, like I'll always, whether I'm working with the C-suite or the CEO or the business owner, I'll say to them, are you clear on your strategy? Are you clear on your top 3 goals? And they go, yeah. So I always know whether or not the strategy's been rolled out or if it's just a whole lot of tasks. If I go around to each of the leaders of his leaders and say, tell me what are the 3 key goals for the organisation for the next 12 months? And if they get on point, we got something clear.
Yeah.
Never once have I had them on point.
No. And I asked the same question in my work with groups and particular organisations. How many of you are clear on your strategic priorities in a room full of CEOs? Most hands go up. Keep your hand up if you're 100% confident that all of your leadership team would also say the same strategic priorities as you. Usually there's still 1 or 2 hands up, but the majority are down. But then even further, what about the rest of the team? Like how many organizations could genuinely go through from the top right down to the front line, and each team member is clear about what the strategic priorities are? And then not only that, even if everyone's clear, which is a remarkable achievement, able to articulate that, how do you actively hold people accountable to executing the strategic priorities on a day-to-day basis? So, and that's the ideal, is if you get that and people are genuinely mostly focusing on the strategic priorities right from the top to the middle to the bottom through a business, then it's game on. And that's a culture piece, and that's the hardest piece of work, which you get, Peter Drucker saying, culture eats strategy for breakfast. Strategy is very important, but once you develop it and document it and you've got your strategic plan and the leadership team's clear, which is not a simple achievement, but let's say you get that done, then the bigger and more complicated piece of work, because it's ongoing and it requires engaging constantly with these difficult things called human beings on a large scale, is getting people to buy into it, understand it, feel that they have some kind of say in their own engagement with it, and then actually every day of their work and contribution to it, moving it forward, so that at the end of each 12-month period, you can review your strategy and say, yeah, we actually kicked at least most of the goals we set out to kick. That one, no, but we understand why. And this was an unexpected win that we didn't set out to achieve.
So where do you see that people go wrong, David? Especially relevant to smaller to medium-sized businesses, though. So, because I think always a lot of people, when you ask them strategy, very often I think most people would say it's a sexy topic. They all like the idea of it. But then where does it break down?
Yeah, I think it's a really good question, and there's a few things I'll say on that, Bram. One is the word strategy means different things to different people. And I mean, I was in a corporate lunch recently where there was a chair facilitating with a group of CEOs and asking some questions about strategy. And most of the business owners were going through and thinking carefully about, how do I do my strategy and having a good think. One of the owners, he had to leave, had a sudden urgent matter, just was very quickly responsive, saying something like, oh yeah, look, we do strategy well, we've got that covered, look, I've got an appointment I've got to run to. But even though he did have something he had to head off to, he clearly had a mindset of, yeah, we do strategy. Now, I have no idea what that meant, but I have a strong suspicion, just given what I've seen over 20 years of working with leaders, that it probably was run in-house with a very small number of people, possibly just himself, writing it down on a page and at best documenting it in a simple Word document that he might refer to occasionally, and feeling like that was sufficient. I think misunderstanding what strategy is and how to execute it and hold people accountable is probably one of the biggest things that small to medium and large businesses do badly. So when you do it, my ideal is if you say 5 million plus, even 2 million plus, you probably need to start thinking about this. One minimum a day, probably more realistically 2 days booked in with you and your leadership team, or whatever that is, phones off, not allowed to leave the room, unless it's absolute emergency, personal or business. And you work through on day one, the where are we now and where do we want to be. Then day two, you work through what does that mean in terms of our strategic choices for the year ahead and the action plan. Now, you can try and get through all that in one day if you're quite a small business and somewhat successfully. If you're more than 10 million, no way. You need a couple of days because the systems will just be at a level of complication and structure that you need a couple of days to properly work that through. What I've seen is it's extremely rare that a business who hasn't been through that before will genuinely give each of the 4 spaces the time and the attention they need and know how to do it well to properly go through not just the challenges, which is where people go to in the where are we now, but equally what are the opportunities that lie before you that you're not yet harvesting or not harvesting as much as you probably could, particularly starting with the low-hanging fruit. When you get into a where are you now conversation, it's human response to go to the negative, the pain. We lost so-and-so this year and we haven't been able to replace them. Revenues have dipped because of this. COVID's hit, we're all struggling. So all of the challenges, and it's quite common that if that's not redirected, the opportunities won't actually be discussed. So when I start that conversation, I always challenge the leadership team to come up with as many opportunities as they do challenges in the current state conversation. Same with the where are you now, where do you want to be, the vision, mission, strategic objectives, the projects that you'll commit resources to for the year in the third space, and the action plan. It's extremely rare that a business will truly have sufficient detail and give adequate time to each of those 4 areas. Which if you don't, you'll get an incomplete strategic conversation and an incomplete strategic plan that is not as effective as it could be. So that's a core problem. I can say more, but I'll stop there. I
want to add to that because I think it's a really good question you asked, Bram. Where do they go wrong? I find where businesses go wrong is that they assume that the leaders know how to execute on the initiatives, okay? So you have, if we think about it from a triangle perspective, you have your vision, mission, purpose, then you have your 3 goals or your 5 goals. They're our big, hairy goals we're going to get this year. Then we have our measures, but then we have our strategy. Our strategy is how we're going to achieve that one goal, right? And then under that, you might have 10 initiatives, right? Because in order for us to increase revenue by say 5%, we're not going to just do it one way, are we? We're going to do it through marketing. We're going to do it through maybe a new sales force. We're going to do it through increasing our referrals. There's lots of different ways. And I find that many leaders get it wrong. And Dave, tell me if you see this too, is because they actually haven't figured out the actual how. And then they actually don't regularly meet monthly or fortnightly going, right, are we on track? Are we off track? What's working? What's not? What roadblocks? So the detail that many people forget, and then accountability struggles because no one's checking in to say it. And then at the end of 3 months or 6 months, we go, and they'll tell you all the other different priorities that took over that priority, which is kind of like what you were talking about before, Arthur, is how do we stop all of those urgent inflowings coming in? And I always go, I know when strategy's missing is when everything feels urgent. That's when we don't have strategy.
And it's, when you get distracted from the agreed strategic priorities, which is so common that a business can be somewhat distracted, even completely distracted, and get to the end of the year and realize you ended up doing completely different things to what you originally set out to. And the process that I was laying out, absolutely, Kylie, I mean, I have a similar way of working. So a couple of days up front, ideally the start of the calendar year, a quarterly review through the year, being clear on you've got your 12-month objectives, but chunk that down into quarterly components that are reasonable milestones towards ultimately achieving your 12-month objectives. Monthly check-ins, at least with the CEO and myself, where I hold the CEO accountable to holding his or her leadership team accountable to executing on the strategy, and helping my client design their leadership team meetings so that they always reference the strategy, whether it's a fortnightly or weekly meeting, that they're always looking at, these are the strategic objectives, so how are we going with that? That reference point, it should be, the strategic objective should be the agenda for every, fortnightly, your formal leadership team meeting. And of course you have your general business and that sort of thing, but they should serve the strategic objectives, not be separate. I do also just want to call out the importance of what's it all for. So yes, you can have your 12-month objectives, but what's that in service of? That's where the vision and the mission come in. And I racked my brains in my time at Second Road Consulting that eventually sold to Accenture. They were very influential in my thinking around strategy. We used to use this term noble purpose with the clients that we worked with, and we used to say to Telstra, to Fairfax, to Optus, BHP, we used to come in with the leadership teams and say, why should the markets that you operate in let you exist? It's the same. It's another way of just saying, what's your purpose? What is it that you do that goes beyond dividends to your shareholders? And that's where you get. That's where the secret to motivation lies, is to develop a compelling vision that you can articulate. And this is just as applicable to small business as big business. Where even if you're installing toilets, and that's a practical example because I was talking to a business on this topic who does install toilets at scale, how do you articulate that in a way that actually lights people up, that is meaningful to both your team and the external stakeholders that you have? And unless you're selling munitions or tobacco or alcohol, those are potentially challenging areas to develop an inspiring vision around. But I'm a firm believer that in the majority of industries, you can find a way to articulate what you do that's meaningful, that's about the service you provide, which of course the economics come after that, and they should stack up and they should satisfy all parties who have a shareholding in the business. Businesses, to give some examples that I've seen do this well, like Car Next Door, my old friend Will Davies, and Will was the fundraising director for a charity I ran, and I watched his journey. He got his inspiration from a charitable program that we used to run for young people, sold his share in a mortgage brokerage in Bondi, tried a few different things, but ultimately settled on this idea of peer-to-peer car sharing. So reducing carbon emissions by taking cars off the road. It's literally Airbnb for cars. Just people book other people's cars when their cars are underutilized. He built it to the point where it sold to Uber a few years ago and became Uber Car Share. Unfortunately, not so long ago, last year I think it was, or 2 years ago now, Uber closed it down, and it turned out it was a strategic acquisition, and Uber saw it as a competitor. And that was devastating for the original founders of Car Next Door. They thought Uber was going to, explode it into the global footprint that Uber has, and that Uber Car Share would instantly be all around the world. Not the case. I've heard they're working on something new, and so they're over it and moving on. But they attracted really brilliant people, and this is the secret, who stayed. So you get the best people in your market to work for you, and you retain them. And there are many examples I could give of businesses like that. Like everything else you talk about is really meaningless unless you get that bit right. And final little point from me, which is not really little, it's super important. The vision is a high-level statement. And I'll give another example of a client, Surf Lakes, that are a global surf park developer. So they've got a vision to create a healthier world through building surfing communities and technology. That's the vision. The mission is to have 40 sites operating around the world by 2040. So the mission is a specific measurable thing that you can actually track that is in a way a metric of achieving the vision. We use these terms vision and mission interchangeably, and look, everyone's welcome to define it how they want, but that's how I define it. And I for many years now, I've supported businesses to have a high-level vision statement that's meaningful to people, and then have a mission statement that's a measurable. It's a metric for how can you track progress with achieving the vision. And if it's inspiring, then it's going to solve a lot of problems with the whole engaging your wider team with the strategy and a whole bunch of other things which we can go into.
Quick question there, David. How much is enough strategy and how much is too little?
Really good question, and absolutely you can overdo it. People worry about, I've got to book 2 days out of my year with the leadership team. You know, the business is going to go under. Half a day every 3 months for a quarterly review. Look, it's inestimable, the value of taking that. Like, what's that as a percentage of the working year? Like, it's probably comes down to 4 days. 4 days out of maybe, I don't know, 200 and something working days. So my maths isn't great right now, but I'm guessing that's like 2 or 3%, if that. Probably less. So what's the value of, taking a tiny percentage of your working time, just as a leadership team, the wider team keeps working in the business, to stop and think at 30,000 feet. That's all that's needed in terms of time. And truly, yes, if you haven't done it before, it does take more time at the start, because you do need to do extra work. And I'm not talking about the time in the room, but the projects that come out are often somewhat additional to your day-to-day work. And you do have to work harder for the first 3 to 6 months in some cases, and it is stressful. But the payoff is that over time, overall, you should increasingly be freer to do proper leadership work and to be a proper business owner and proper CEO, and not in the weeds constantly. And the same for your leadership team if you have one. It does take a bit of time if it's a first for you at going through this kind of process. But the value is long-term efficiency, long-term freedom, long-term enjoyment, including for your team, uplift in morale. Even just the going through those 4 spaces and getting more clarity, people find their morale lifts when they're clearer about why they're in a business and where the business is going. So yes, look, and overdoing it would be, every month spending a day reviewing strategy. That's too much. And underdoing it would be an hour a year. That's ridiculous. But what I laid out is how I've found it, is a healthy balance, and being clear that there's probably going to be an additional cost of time and stress for a few months, but it's worth it. So just get through it.
Great, thank you.
I think you make a good point, Dave, but also, Bram, I think it's so important for businesses. I think when the leaders are intentional and on the same page about where we're going, everyone feels like they're clearer. I always think of strategy as not just a once-off. I see it as a rhythm. It's just we develop it, and then we have a rhythm to make sure that are we on track? Are we off track, right? That's once a month. Even that 1 hour of intentional thinking can save months of wasted time.
100%.
That are just not even related. How many problems do people come up with? We need a new process. This isn't working. We've got a customer complaint, something else. And then we go fix that. And actually, we're not even doing the things that we should be doing in the business. Too busy fixing all the other stuff because we think that it's emotionally important.
Yeah.
I know we've gone over, but
Yeah.
there's one question I'll ask that we ask all our guests, Dave, and that is, if businesses, entrepreneurs, business leaders could just take one action from today's session, what would you suggest they do?
If you haven't been implemented a formal annual strategic planning process and execution process in your business, do that. That's for those who haven't yet. Like, begin and seek, the support of those who have expertise in this area. If you then the second part to that is, if you're a business that does have some kind of annual strategic planning, and classically this is, look, we did strategy 5 years ago and it's a bit outdated, and we had a one-day conversation in 2012, and we have a one-page document, which is again surprisingly common. Then definitely consider seriously what you're missing out on by not having an annual ongoing proper strategic planning process. The final bit for businesses that potentially do have some kind of ongoing rhythm but are doing it in-house. I encountered this a lot at Second Road, and then afterwards running Evolve Strategy. There was a big difference between clients who understood the benefit of engaging an external expert strategy facilitator whose whole career really has been, their art is about expertly facilitating a productive strategy process from an objective perspective. Versus businesses that might talk to a strategy facilitator initially and then suddenly pivot and freak out a bit and say, well, look, we don't have the budget for that. We'll just do it in-house. This stuff can't be too hard. It's a mistake. And businesses do that, and they do bumble along. And of course, the CEO can get up with a whiteboard and a pen and stand in front of their team and say, look, where are we now, guys? What are the challenges? What's our vision? What's our mission? What are our objectives? What's the business model? What are the projects? What's the action plan? At the very least, they're going to have an internal bias, even if they may have a background with a strategy house or for whatever reason have some expertise in the area. The fact that they're in the business is limiting, because they'll naturally have an individual bias to particular things. You can't help it, but it's your baby. You care about it. You have emotional attachment towards it. An external facilitator, one of the many benefits is that they truly are objective, and they also work with businesses across many industries, which means you see things in parallel worlds that you can bring to that particular industry. You're not just locked into one market and one industry. So if you're a business in that scenario who up until now has been operating with a mindset of we can do this ourselves, seriously consider again what you're missing out on and the mistakes that you're probably making by sticking to that limiting view, and consider talking to an objective expert in strategy.
Wonderful. And it also means that you as the CEO or the leader actually gets to be a participant. They get to sit back and really think and question and hear what others are doing, as opposed to trying to facilitate it as well. They can become that person that gets to really be in that thinking space as well.
Yeah.
Thank you, Dave. No more questions from me, but Arthur, Bram, any final closing comments for you?
Thanks, guys.
Yeah, my closing comment would be, yes, it's all form, but to actually physically document and circulate into the hands, actually physically, not in an email. For me, it's a tangible thing. I want everyone to have a copy there. And that's how you kind of regroup and reframe, and then stop people from going on tangents and say, is it in the plan?
Yeah.
I've got a good idea. Is it in the plan?
Yeah.
No. We'll pick it up next time and catch up.
Off it on that continuous improvement list, hey? Yeah, love it.
All good. Nice to meet you, David. Thank you.
You too, Arthur. You too, Brad.